Okay, so the topic today is Green Junction, the next generation. Now, it's no secret to anybody in this room, certainly, that the current version of Green Junction is slightly controversial, meaning that there are people who use it quite often, but the fact is the adoption rate has not been what we really have hoped for. Now, the fact is that when Alexandra was and it's certainly she was the one spearheading sort of the integration aspect of Green Junction when she was here at Green Communities, and I think she did a very good job. But she was working with a piece of software that wasn't necessarily as user-friendly as we would have liked, and it wasn't necessarily as intuitive as probably some people would want. Now, I'm a pretty technical person. It's just part of who I am. It's also part of my my work. So, things that I don't find difficult, I'm still very aware that other people have difficulty with them. The idea of using the Wiki markup language, for instance, that's the language that you use within all wikis, but specifically within Green Junction, to be able to add things to a page. It's a bit of a complicated process and really takes a lot of consistent practice to get a handle of, and that just isn't feasible for large numbers of people, busy people, who don't necessarily have the time to pore over an encyclopedia of terms that they might only use once every month, once every couple of months. So the hope was, and the hope is, that with this new version of Green Junction, which, by the way, is very, very similar in many ways to the current version, but that some of these issues, some of these complications have been addressed. And I really think that they have. To be honest, I've been using it quite frequently over the last couple of weeks, and I'm very pleased with it. But the way that it is right now is not the way that it will necessarily be when it's finally launched, and we're hoping to do that at the beginning of the new year. The reason being is that we do have somewhat more flexibility in regards to, say, how it looks, how it's laid out, that sort of thing. So part of why we think that this session will be useful is that it means that we can give anyone who's currently, really just people who are directly related to the office first, will have access to be able to go in and try it out and see if they find it easier, if there are things that they find more difficult, or if they have questions about it, and we can sort of fine-tune before the full launch occurs. Now, it really is a generational thing, meaning that Confluence, which is what our wiki is based on, are built on, in our case, has been upgraded, and in fact had been upgraded quite a while ago. So the jump in terms of versions is pretty significant, what we're dealing with here. So while the look of it will remain fairly standard, at least at this point, the functionality is actually quite different. Now, what I'm actually going to do in this session is I'm going to screen share. I'm going to share my own screen, so I'll be able to actually show some of the differences between the old version of Green Junction and the newer version live. So I'm just going to do that now. It'll just take a couple of minutes to set up. Okay, so it's going to be up on the screen in just a second or so. I'm just going to give a couple of more seconds just to make sure that everyone can see what I'm seeing. And what you should be seeing, at least in a moment, is the login page, or actually the post-login page after you log in to the new Green Junction. And the fact is, just like I mentioned before, you're probably seeing something that's very similar to what the old Green Junction site was. And in fact, I'm just going to switch over to that for a second. Now, this is what the old site looked like. Really, it might not look like this exactly for you because it's all based on what you have access to, even the recently updated section. Yeah, I could hear you there, Bruce, by the way. and even the section on the right with the recently updated, that's all based on the permissions that you have at any particular time. And by the way, permissions, which have always been a bit of a thorn in my own side in regards to making pages, that process has been somewhat simplified as well, which is, believe me, great news. So this is what the old version of the initial launch page was, and going back to the new version, you'll notice that there isn't really a lot different. The layout is fairly similar. The only thing that you might notice is different is up here at the top of the page, in the top right, there are buttons for Add Page and Add Blog Post. One other thing you'll notice, and this will become particularly obvious as we go to kind of go through some of these sections, is that it's somewhat less cluttered. Now, this page, not as much, but it'll really become self-evident when we actually go into one of the pages, which is exactly what we'll do right now. We're actually going to sandbox. Now, the sandbox, as you might remember, though you may not have had access to it previously, is really what we use. It's a page, a section of Green Junction that we use particularly for testing. So we go in there and we can create pages and we can test with different plugins and we can test with different aspects of the site. And it doesn't affect any of the other sections of the site at any particular time. So this has been made, the sandbox has been made available to everybody to go in and sort of play around with. The idea is that that way anybody can not really do any permanent damage to the site. You can really feel free to go in and just test and send it and add attachments and that sort of thing, because before we do the launch, we can clear it out entirely. Now, just to give you an idea and just to kind of jog your memory, I'm just going to go into the old Green Junction for a moment, and also go down to. I'm also going to go into the sandbox. First, I just need to log out of this old account. Believe it or not, I have a number of test accounts on both Green Junctions. So this currently what we're looking at is what the old, at this point I'll refer to it as the old Green Junction sandbox section looked like. Now, there isn't anything in there at the moment, but some of the things about the design you might remember. One of the things that has always been a little bit irritating to me is how much material is taken up at the bottom of the page with these kind of, they're very useful links. They're things that I use quite a bit, but having them at the bottom of the screen, for one thing, I found very the opposite of intuitive. And also, they just didn't have any kind of sense to them. They just seemed to be laid out all over the place, and it became very confusing. And I think it became confusing for a lot of different people. Another thing that I didn't really enjoy is how on the top of the page, now right here, this looks fairly okay. It says the sandbox, home, but if you had anything longer than a couple of words, it would actually split up and it would separate on the screen. And I mean, it's just a design aspect, but I think it's kind of symbolic of some of the other issues that we were running into, which is that it just didn't look right. And that actually even goes on to some of the other options that are here at the top of the screen. The ability to edit and add attachments, of course, these are very necessary things, but some of the other aspects like zip upload, doc import, things that people are not using very often, they just take up space. They just add confusion, and that's one of the things I like about the more simplified layout of the new site. I'm just going to switch over to that. Now, this is the sandbox of the new site. You'll notice I've already created a few things within it, but what we're looking at is actually the entirety of the page. What we see at the bottom here, when it says powered by a free Atlassian Confluence community, that is the very bottom of the page. All that information that used to be sort of below that point has actually been put into these different context menus that are at the top of the screen. Now, to the minds of some, it might almost seem like a step backward to be kind of filling a bunch of menus with things as opposed to having it available on the screen. But because these are context menus, it's actually a lot more intelligently organized. And what it also does is that it hides a lot of the aspects that a normal user, that an everyday regular user who isn't involved with the behind-the-scenes aspects won't need to use. So if I was in the sandbox and I wanted to be able to add a page to it, well, I'm going to look at the Add section, and click on it, and I can have the option for add a page, add a blog post, the ability to add personalized blogs within each community. That's something that's been added, not something we're going to have to deal with at the moment, or add attachments or comments. So the add button is right there, the things that you can add immediately underneath it. And to me, personally, it just makes a lot more sense to have it that way, because when I go into one of these pages, when I go into, say, the Green IT section, I probably am going in there either to add a page or edit a page. So to have these add buttons and edit button right here, which obviously edits the page as well, opens up an edit menu, that makes a ton of sense. Now, the biggest menu in this case is the tools menu. Now, the tools menu is pretty significant. It has a lot of that information from the bottom before, things that you wouldn't necessarily need to use as an everyday user. But it's good to become familiar with the options that are on the page itself. Most of them make a lot of immediate sense. The idea that you can look at what attachments are connected to a particular page. You can look at the page history to see what edits have been made to it. That sort of thing is a necessity for any sort of site which is shared amongst people. In fact, if you look at the layout as a whole, it actually has a few similarities, at least in my own mind, as the layout of a lot of Google Docs style documents. Where even the idea of the sharing button and things like that, all sort of in your face and sort of large buttons, I think visually it makes a lot more sense. So you can also, from here, do restrictions, email the page out. In our case of our wiki, since a lot of the permissions are rather restrictive anyway, the email probably isn't something you're going to want to do regularly. But if you're emailing it to someone who already has that permission, it's definitely okay. But there are a lot of options here that export to PDF, export to Word. They simply work a lot better than they did in the previous site. And though they're not things that you're going to be used on an everyday basis, it's nice that you immediately have access to them from any page. But what I really want to get into is sort of the day-to-day routine if someone is going to be using Green Junction, some of the difficulties that occurred in the past, and how those have been simplified. Now, I am an ambassador for the wiki just because I think it's a very useful thing. The fact is, when people compare it to something that it's not, like a social network, to Skype or a correspondence system, it actually frustrates me a little bit because the entire purpose and the way it was originally designed was mostly as a storage location where people could communicate and share resources. Yeah, Ambassador Doug of Green Junction, that's exactly right. Hey, I like it, but I also recognize that there were very legitimate difficulties. And when people came to me and said that they had trouble doing this and this, I didn't think to I was never thinking, boy, I wish they could get a handle on this. I was always thinking, boy, I wish this was easier so everybody could get a handle on it. And that particularly came true, that particularly was the case when it came to editing pages. So I'm actually going to add a page right here. I'm going to click on Add and go to Page. Now, some of you might have had this issue in the past, and it's certainly something that I've had to deal with. You might notice, and you might not be able to tell from what you can see on the screen, but the browser that I use, the internet browser that I use to browse the internet, is Google Chrome, just one that I particularly enjoy. A lot of people use Internet Explorer, a lot of people use Firefox. Well, one of the difficulties that we ran into with Google Chrome, and something that I had to deal with in particular a lot, was that the rich text editor, when you went in to edit or create a new page, works infrequently. We tried to get this fixed in a numerous different ways, but even now, and I'll show you, I'm just going to go into the sandbox of the older version for a second just to show you the difference between how it looks. For some of you, what you see on the page here, it says Wiki Markup and Preview. For some of you, there's another option for Rich Text Editor. But for me, it never showed up in Google Chrome. So I would always have to use the Wiki Markup language, which I was fine with, but it certainly was, for someone who would be looking over my shoulder, it might look like I was typing Greek sometimes. It just did not look natural. So now by default, and I'm switching back over again, now, by default, the rich text editor is always on. And in fact, for anyone who has any familiarity with creation of online documents or blog editing, this should look pretty familiar. I mean, I think it looks pretty familiar in general, even from word processing experience. So, we can see that at the top of the page, we can re-edit the title to say, well, even just test in this case. And on the actual entry location itself, it really just comes with a lot of the options that you would expect. In this case, because it has to conform itself to HTML and the way that people view websites, you don't have as much freedom as you would in regards to a word processing document, but it also means that it's more consistent across the board. So you could create text, and you could select it and bold and italicize and underline, and you can see that as I hover my mouse pointer over each one of these options, it does give us an idea of what each one is, and if there's a shortcut on your keyboard to use it, it tells us that as well, like Control-U for underline. So I'm just going to write a little bit of text here. Now, I can't see all of the Wimba screen at the moment, but I just heard that there's a question.
Sorry, Doug. I was just going to mention, Doug, Doug's pointer or mouse overs aren't showing up. They're just showing up as a black box on there. But when you do move your mouse over the V or the I, then it comes up with a text prompt.
Awesome, thanks, Bruce. I think it might have to do with some of the my customized desktop. It actually changes the color of some of the mouse pointers. But yeah, that's absolutely correct. When you hover your mouse over any aspects of the screen, it does give you a summary. So I just wrote a little bit of test text. As you can probably imagine, if I was to select some of it and press bold, select some other sections of it, underline. I mean, again, it works exactly as you might expect. And it's nice that it's kind of immediately intuitive, immediately what you would expect it to be, that there isn't a lot of switching around to different views. If you want a preview, well, you go down to the bottom right and you click on preview, and it'll give you a preview. I'll just click on it right now so we can see exactly what that looks like. Yeah, it pops up right in the same window, and if I want to go back, I just click on Edit, and I'm right back in my Edit screen once again. Now, this is sort of basic functionality. I'm sure even before you didn't have a lot of trouble just with this sort of aspect, but let's try to do something that's more complicated, something that's, to me, has always been a little bit more frustrating than it really needed to be, and that is the ability to add attachments to a particular page. Now, in the past, and you can still do it this way, you can click on Insert. Now, this is still a little easier than it was on the old version of Green Junction. And if I wanted to add an attachment, I would click on Attachment. And from here, I could choose. I'll actually just bring it up so we can see. From here, I could choose a file, and I could select one, and I could actually upload it to the site. Those of you who are very familiar with Green Junction know that often in the past, you would actually have to then create a list of the attachments on the screen or create a new page with a list of attachments, which it's just simply an extra step that felt unnecessary, always felt unnecessary. And it also means that something that at the end of the day should be fairly simple was simply more confusing than it needed to be. Now, it's been simplified to some extent using the new Green Junction. I'm just going to cancel this. I'm going to cancel this as well. And I'm going to bring up a folder. Okay, so you should be able to see this. This is just a folder that I created today on my Windows machine, and I put some content within it. Now, in our case, you could individually put those files by going to Insert, like before, and go to Attachment. But you can also just drag the attachments immediately into the page on Green Junction. And that doesn't just go for attachments. You can also do that with images. So I'm just going to show you. I have a couple of images right here. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to drag one of these images right into the page here. And we can see, and maybe it might have come up a little bit too fast for you watching, especially with a little bit of delay here. But what that actually allows you to do is you drag it onto the page. It says that it's attaching it and that it's uploading it, and then it immediately shows up on the screen itself. Now, this is slightly different between different browsers. Again, I'm using Google Chrome, and it works perfectly. In fact, I've done it in a lot of different formats, and I haven't had any issue with it. But this is just an example of one of the shortcuts that you can sort of use. Now, if you had multiple, say, PDFs, well, wouldn't that be an easier way to get them up on the screen? But certainly multiple pictures, this is a huge time saver. Now, just to give you an idea of what happens when you actually upload a photo, if you click on it, you can actually immediately change the size very easily as well. The options actually show up when you click on it. Now, by default, it gives you sort of 3 sizes to choose from, but you could also go in there, and if you wanted to make it a specific size, you could certainly do that as well. And you can even add a border to it by just clicking on the border button. And in fact, if you wanted to make it so that the image that when you clicked on it, it was linked to somewhere else, by default the link button is here as well. If we click on that, then all we have to do is put in a web address, and then once it's published, you can just sort of you can just go in there and click it, and it'll work just like that. I'm just going to cancel that. Now, images are one thing. We do have another way of inserting images as well. If you click on Insert and Image, it's just like you would expect. We can see that already when we go to that. What we've already uploaded is here. So if we wanted to insert, say, the same image again and again, we could just go to Insert, and instead of having to upload it again, we could obviously just select it. But if I wanted to choose a file and select, say, this image, we can see that it uploads, and it's immediately available to me for me to put in as well. We'll see that the options are available. Again, these are some of the same options that were available before, but simply the layout and the way that it interacts with the page itself is a lot easier kind of to wrap your head around. So we could also, if we had a direct link from another website, we could put it in the image URL. So if I, say, went to, well, I'm not actually going to do it here live, but if we did have, say, like if we did a Google image search and we were linking to a site from that, we could just put in the direct link there as well. So I'm just going to cancel this so we don't end up with too much material on the page. But that isn't the only thing that you can drag and drop. And this actually kind of took me by surprise. I'm very, very pleased with the ability to do that because of the shortcut aspect of it. But I could also, and I'm just going to show you here, I have right here a kind of simplistic Microsoft Word document. Now, we were always having sort of minor issues in regards to importing Microsoft Word style documents before. The problem would be that the conversion didn't go very well, or it just wasn't as intuitive as you sort of would have hoped. So I'm actually just going to show you how easy it is this time. Microsoft Word document, just a normal one, and I'm just going to plop it right on the screen here. I'm just going to remove this text so we don't have anything in our way. And if we can even see, it gives us an indication. It says Office Word, name. It gives us the name of the document that I just uploaded. This is a very simplistic document in this case. But if we go to Preview, and this might be a little difficult to totally understand, but I think you'll get the impression. Now, again, this was a very simplistic document. The preview shows us that the entire document just gets placed in a box in the page itself. Now, you might want to, instead of having it embedded in the page, you might want to put a link to the Microsoft Word document, and we can certainly do that as well. But for something where you've already worked on it in a Microsoft Word document, you've already put a lot of time into the formatting and editing, well, this is a much better way to incorporate it within your page at any particular time. So if I go back to Edit, then we have the box once again. So we can see the difference between the preview version, which really does represent the final version in this case, and what we have as a sort of a temporary version. You'll notice as well that there's an option here to download file. So you could have it so it's embedded, so you could see it at any particular time, but they also have the option to download it. Now, that goes for lots of different formats, not just Microsoft Word. Microsoft PowerPoint, that's certainly the big one. I'm actually just going to show you that for a moment. So we can see here, this is my list of files once again. Yeah, absolutely. This is a PDF in this case. So the PDF, what it does, instead of how the Microsoft Word document works, since a PDF is composed of multiple slides or multiple pages that have to be kind of maneuvered around, I'm just going to show you what the preview looks like with that. Now, it's not going to, this is a rather large PDF, so we're probably not going to have time to watch it load up entirely here, but we can see how the actual structure of it works. It's a little embedded square that you can change pages within. Same sort of thing if you were to upload a PowerPoint within here. So people can actually view it immediately on the site itself as opposed to having to download it in every single case. Now, going back to what I was saying before about the complications in regards to doing attachments, well, maybe this is another case where I just want to have a list of attachments. You don't want them embedded. You just want them to show up on the screen. So I'm just going to go to Insert. And once again, I'm going to go down to Attachment. And again, like I said before, you go to Attachment just like you go to Insert Image, and it tells us the things that have already been uploaded onto the site. It all gets stored there as you upload it. So I'm just going to choose one that we've already had here, maybe the PDF in this case. And we can change at the bottom here the text that's on the screen. So I'm just going to call that PDF 1. And I'll click on Insert. Sorry, I actually removed an aspect of it by myself here, so it's just PDF in this case. But that now is a link to the final file. If I was to publish that or preview it in this case, then it's just a direct link to that PDF. And you know, as opposed to having to individually do the attachments and then put a list of all the attachments, so when people go into it, they can see the attachments and whatever. Now we actually have a list of anything that you make, and you can actually customize the link itself, change the title of it. I mean, it is just simply a lot easier to do, and it's a lot more. And it's for someone like me who really does like putting a lot of attachments and a lot of images onto a page. Frankly, I'm a little bit addicted to it. It simply just makes a lot more sense. And sense is, I think, really what we're kind of wrapping our heads around here, that it needs to make more sense if people are going to adopt it on a wider level. So the big question is, what if you want to do something a little bit more complicated? Now, the fact is a lot of people are not interested in the more complicated aspect of it, but eventually you might have to do it. Maybe you'll want to, especially now that the option is available to you, maybe you're going to want to embed something a little bit more complicated. Maybe you're going to want to put a video on the screen or something like that. Well, that's one of the nice options that are available to us as well. You can really embed almost anything on the screen at this point. Now, I don't want to lose anyone here, so I'm just going to show you something that's fairly simple, just so we all kind of understand it. So what if I wanted to put a YouTube video on this page? Before, that would have been so complicated I wouldn't even recommend it to people. But at this point, I think that just about anyone could get a handle on it in a fairly short amount of time. If I go on to the Insert button, Insert right here, really we see from the list, if you look at it, we see that there isn't an option here for video. There is options for Wiki markup, and for those of us who had a lot of experience with Wiki markup, we know that we could probably figure it out from there, but that simply was just too complicated. Let's go down to the last option, which is Other Macros. Now, this screen might look familiar to some of you, and it might actually look a little scary to some of you, because before it was just a hodgepodge of confusing, often out-of-date plugins that just didn't necessarily make a lot of sense. But in my case, I'm just looking to add a YouTube video to the page, so I'm just going to look up YouTube here. And we can see that it actually removes the options that have no connection to what I was searching for immediately. And we see that what we get is the widget connector. Now, the widget connector is very, very easy to use. If I just select it, all it does is give us 3 options. In fact, the second and third option, we don't even have to worry about. All it's asking for is what's called the widget URL. And in our case, that just means the URL to the content that we want embedded. Maybe a URL to a Google Doc. There is a way to embed Google Docs using this exact same thing. Maybe it's a video from a different location. Maybe it's a piece of audio. And in fact, if you go back to the test document, we'll talk about this in just a little bit, I put together a document which kind of highlights some of the new features of the page. Of the new Green Junction. And within it, I have some embedded audio, some embedded video, so you can see exactly what that looks like. But what we wanted in this case, or what I wanted, is I wanted to insert a YouTube video. So I'm just going to pull up a YouTube video. The Trololo song, for any of you who might be familiar with it. Well, this one is really easy to get the address for. I can just go to the top of the screen in this case. In fact, I'll pull this up so you can see exactly what I'm doing. Hopefully you can see that. I'm just going to select the address from up here, and I'm going to cut it. And then I'm going to go back to the page and just paste it right in here. Then I click on Insert, and it puts it in. It says Widget Connector, and it gives us the URL of the YouTube video. And if I just go to Preview, we can actually see that the video appears immediately within it. The easy insert of YouTube, to me, the fact is there are a lot of things that I never did with Green Junction simply because it was too slow, because it was too ponderous. It just wasn't as easy as I'd want it to be. Now, if I wanted to put in 20 YouTube videos, well, I could do that about as quickly as I could think of what videos to put in there. And if I wanted to do that with other sort of formats, I could certainly do that as well. In fact, I did mention the document that I put together before, and I just want to switch to that for a moment. It's actually in the sandbox, and I said before that I've made the sandbox available to everybody, and that's because I want everybody to be able to come in and play with it, to go in and edit and change whatever they feel like without any concern about what the final result might be. So I'm just going to go into the sandbox. And I should point out, by the way, that I guess they call it the breadcrumbs, the trail of where you are in the wiki is very much the same. It just says it at the top of the screen, and it will let us know where we are at any particular time. So we see right now in the sandbox there's two documents, one that I've used just to kind of test with, which is called Attachments, and I've made one called What's New in Green Junction, an Introduction. And again, that's available to everybody, anyone who wants to go in if you want a little bit of a refresher. And frankly, since this room isn't full of people, I'm going to have to direct them to this document. If they go in and click on that, I'm just going to click on it here. It actually brings up a document where it compares a lot of the old version of Green Junction aspects to the new version. It's got a lot of my pithy, not clever commentary with it, but it covers a lot of what I was saying here. In fact, if we look at this section right here, we can see that if I went to insert an attachment, well, this is what an MP3 would look like in that case. In this case, that's a link to the Beatles song "A Hard Day's Night." But we can also embed that audio immediately underneath it. Now, I'm not going to play it right now. It wouldn't work correctly with yours anyway, since I'm streaming it from my desktop. But when you go in there, you can click on that and see exactly what it looks like. And if we can go down a little bit. And one of the things that we can see here is an example of what a PDF looks like when it's put in. Like I was saying before, it works very similar to an embedded version that you would see on other sites. One of the interesting things that you can see, one of the concerns is that because of the size of it, though you can actually change it yourself, though the size is kind of small, you can actually click on the button here in the bottom right, full screen. I know that looks kind of funny to you just then because it all popped up at once, but if you had something where you just wanted someone to be able to see a PowerPoint presentation or a Microsoft Word document or a Microsoft Excel sheet, you could embed that all in, and they'd be able to see it full screen if they wanted. And yeah, we do have this is an example of just some of the sorts of options that are available. Now I'm rapidly running out of time. Yeah, Bruce mentions it's just a demo of features thrown together to show some of the various options. That's exactly right. But really, it had to be put together because the thing that we are most anticipating are sort of individual questions, individual concerns, because everyone's experience with it is slightly different. The things that one person has trouble with, other people might not. But I do think that there are some things that were kind of issues across the board that have thankfully been addressed to some extent. Even that goes down to the layout as a whole. I'm just going to open up, go back to the sandbox for a moment, because one thing I wanted to take a look at was the permissions before we open things up for questions. So this is a very simplistic page that I created earlier. All it does is have one attachment on it. But one of the things that I wanted to look at was under Tools, is to go down to Restrictions. Now, one of the irritating things about the pages before was just how not necessarily how difficult. To be honest, a lot of the issues with permissions are not something that your average user is really going to have to be concerned about. I'm still going to be here, and Bruce is still going to be here, and we're going to be administering the site, and we're going to be responsible for kind of larger scale permissions. But if you're within, if you're kind of the owner of one of the sections, and you want to kind of specify who can see what, it's still something that you're going to want to be aware of. So we go down to Tools and Restrictions. And from here, we can restrict viewing of this page. Right now, it's open to everybody. But if you did have a specific, and again, you would have to have permissions in order to be able to do this. You would actually have to be an admin for one of the spaces to be able to do it. From here, you can actually select a group or an individual person. So you can say who should be able to see something, what group should be able to see something. For us, for people who are on the admin side of things, this is really before. Sometimes you would have to make a change and then test and make a change and test. But this right here, because it's so kind of visual, because it's all put up on the screen in a very kind of sensible way, it makes things a lot easier. For entering user or group name, well, in our case, almost all users are going with their first initial and last name, like, say, mine. Sorry, mine wouldn't have come up because I'm already logged in, but I mean that would go for anybody in this case. But if I wanted to restrict it to them, I just put in their name and do it that way. Again, not something you're probably going to have to deal with directly, but for people who do, it's something that's very useful. And in fact, once we do the full launch, obviously it's going to take a little bit of time to get people comfortable with the idea of going in again, because we're not just trying to get the people who are still using the old version of Green Junction. We're kind of really trying to give people who may have been frustrated with the older version kind of a new beginning on things. So we'll probably end up doing a few of these Wimba-style sessions to get them comfortable with some of these new features, but also just to make sure that even from the ground up that comfort level is there. One of the good reasons, I think, to give people an opportunity sort of to play around in a, I'll say, non-threatening environment, meaning that they can't make any changes that are going to in any way negatively affect the site as a whole. So I'm just going to go back to the dashboard because I just want to show you one more thing before we open up to. Sorry, Shay, you find the page very confusing. In what way?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Doug? Hello?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, I find the page. Can you flip back to it for a minute?
Absolutely.
I was in this yesterday, and it seems that it was either or. The restrict viewing and the restrict editing, and I wasn't able to have restricted viewing and restricted editing.
Oh, right. Well, I think you do have to add them individually in this case. So if I wanted to, at the top of the screen where it says restrict viewing of the page or restrict editing of this page, I did select me just then to make viewing restricted to me, and then select restrict editing of the page and select me again, and that gets added to editing restricted to in this case. So yeah, I do think that you have to do those individually in this case instead of sort of all encompassing, make it so one person could do both at the same time, but as long as they're both added to it, it should still work.
Okay, so that option up there with the two, I can restrict it just to me, or I can restrict it to a person, and then I input their name. Is it in that space and then hit restrict?
Yeah, either a person or a group. Yeah, most definitely. The person, I imagine, and I haven't had a lot of experience with it. I'm just going to take a look for Bruce's name for a second. Yeah. Okay. So I mean, even as you begin to type, it'll actually show you the names that match it. And in fact, it doesn't even require the first initial last name aspect. They'll actually start popping up immediately. So yeah, you can select them individually through that menu right here.
Okay, and another issue around page restrictions was when you had a tree, the first page, I think, dictated pages that were farther down in the tree. How does that work now?
In our case, and again, I haven't gone too deep into this yet, but that you're absolutely right. The fact is, it would always the child pages of any parent page would always follow through with the restrictions from before, from the parent page. The child pages would take on the restrictions of that. And I don't know at this point, and I'll follow up with you in regards to this, whether that's still the case or not. I imagine that it is generally by default, simply because the process of having to individually go out to all those pages, especially if you have a large tree with maybe dozens of different pages, would be so kind of strenuous that it wouldn't be worthwhile. But I will follow up with you on that. I haven't really gone too far into the permissions just because there hasn't been a lot of content to change. But we'll definitely go over that as well.
Okay, that would be great because I do have large categories, like just the initial split between GICC and Green Communities Foundation, and then everything under it is all the classes, and so the restrictions, it's a really complicated area.
No, absolutely. In fact, restrictions, it's such a large part of what it is. I think it's probably, we're going to want to focus on it a little bit more when we do Space Admin WIMBA sessions, because we want to make sure that everyone is very comfortable with that aspect, because that's something, particularly with the Green Junction site, how we use it at Green Communities, a lot of it is restricted. A lot of it is very specific in regards to restrictions. So getting a better understanding of that, I think, would help everybody out.
I think that would be great because I think it's one of the issues in terms of people using it is wanting to be able to upload sensitive material that's available to some people and not everybody.
Yeah, absolutely, and especially what I mentioned before about the idea of it being a storage location, about it being a place where sensitive material could be uploaded, and you feel comfortable in the fact that it is sensitive in the correct way. Otherwise, no one's going to use it for that purpose, because if they can't trust that only the people that they want to be able to see something are seeing it, then they're just not going to use it. They'd rather risk, not even risk. They'd rather just keep it on their own system and only provide it to those people individually. Yeah, absolutely. Sensitivity is the most important thing in regards to a lot of these spaces, because some of them are composed entirely of documents that are only supposed to be seen by certain individuals. Now, Bruce just mentioned, and to me individually, that this is a really nice function as well. One of the things that we always tried to implement into the other version of Green Junction, and it was to a certain extent, we're kind of incorporating minor social networking aspects to it. And what we mean by that is the ability to add comments and reply to those comments and that sort of thing. Now, Bruce mentioned just then in the chat about the idea of being able to add blog posts. That is something that you can now do. We're going to get into that more deeply in a future session as well. But every space can have a blog, meaning that if they wanted to do daily updates, and every day or every week or every month they were going to do an update and would kind of just continue to roll along. It could even export into an RSS feed, that being a real simple syndication feed that you could then push out to another website or to a website as a whole or to someone's email or something like that. I know that's sort of a more complicated idea, but just giving you an idea that there is sort of more in regards to what's available here. But you can add comments, of course. And the comments in this case, they actually give you the full rich text editor options when you are leaving a comment. Say if I was going to leave a comment on this attachments page that I created, and I was just going to say, because I'm a very optimistic person, so I just left it with, "Hey Doug, great job," and I just wanted to save that. And we can immediately see that it has my response there. It has my little image next to it. Now, the comments, we did have that for a certain amount of time. They never worked as well as we wanted them to. In fact, one of the things that we've been trying to incorporate, and we've had great success, and we just haven't put it in the final version, is even the ability to approve of comments, meaning that you could say, give it basically a thumbs up saying that you agree with something, like you would on a Facebook page or a Google Plus page or something like that. And that's something that we may incorporate if there's a call for it. But even just the idea of being able to simply reply to something. See, as we can see on the screen here, we have edit, remove, reply. Well, I could reply immediately to my comment, and there could be a string of conversation in regards to a certain article. Now, we talked already. Some of these sections are composed entirely of documents that are very specifically, the permissions are very specific for. But some of them are just content that's going out there. Sometimes, now especially, you might just want to put up a PowerPoint presentation or a link to a video. And how nice to be able to comment on that and have other people comment on that comment and basically have a minor conversation here that can even be easily collapsed. If I click on that button right there, it actually collapses the entire thing. So it doesn't necessarily have to take up too much screen real estate at any particular time. So I'm just going to go back to the dashboard just for one moment, because I did want to show as well that the layout of your particular space doesn't necessarily have to be what I just showed just then. By default, that's what it is. By default, it looks like this. Right? I mean, it's pretty clear. It's pretty well laid out, I think. But if we go to the Green IT site as we have it right now, then we have things slightly different. We have it so the layout shows an entire list on the left-hand side of all of the links of the site. It's very much more like a traditional Wiki site, almost even like a Wikipedia, in that it's laid out. You know what it really looks like to me is almost like a help section. If you go to a help section of a lot of websites or a lot of programs, this is how it's laid out. And if you had a significant amount of content where you didn't necessarily want people to, where you really wanted people to have access to the entirety of the tree, the page tree at any particular time, doesn't matter where they are within the page. So like in this case, we always have a way back to any one of the pages within the entire site, then this is an option that you have available to you. There are actually many, in fact, options that we have in regards to page design and layout, and we're actually looking into more options. However, I do think, generally, it's a better thing to have it very consistent across the board, that most of these sites look the same. But I also understand that for a lot of people, they're only interested in one section. They're only interested in one space. That's the only one they're ever going to really go into. So the fact that yours might be a little bit customized, I think, hey, it can't really hurt. And if there's something specific in terms of layout that you're interested in, definitely bring that to our attention. In fact, before we're done here, which will be just in a few moments, I'm going to push out a poll where people can actually, if there's anything that you're looking for, if there's anything that you'd like to see or that you've had issues with in the past, that you'll have an opportunity to give that feedback. So realizing actually that we're rapidly running out of time, are there any questions before I send out that poll?
Hi, Doug. The only issue I've had that I haven't really worried about because there wasn't any way of getting around it was as a new administrator of the space, where previously it had been Cheyenne, it meant nobody could access things that she personally only had access to. So then I had to re-add things in because I couldn't get a hold of them to put them where I needed them.
No, I know exactly what you're talking about. The idea of switching space administrators means that really you almost have to individually go in and switch those permissions around from one person to another. Unfortunately, that's really one of the limitations of the fact that we have such a sort of a restrictive environment in the first place. Because otherwise, if it was made even more simple than that, it could end up causing issues as a whole in regards to permissions. Because not that this is likely to happen, but you really want to make sure that the person who is in charge and who is saying that they are who they say they are, and that this sort of thing can kind of spread outwards a little bit, especially when we're talking about documents that are meant to be very secure. So yeah, no, I recognize what you're saying, and I remember actually when Cheyenne had to switch over a lot of the permissions, it became a little bit of a hassle of a process. I suppose we could also, and this is an idea just because since we're going to be starting in some ways in sort of a new way, we could even create an administrator account that wasn't connected to a person's name necessarily. It could be connected to a position or connected to an organization or something like that. And then they would be given those permissions, and then that could just be swapped between people, something along those lines. Just an idea anyway. Sorry, another question?
Hi, Doug. I think this issue of space administration is a big one. I agree with Sandra. I have no idea who's in charge. I don't know if it's you, and I feel a bit baffled sometimes about where to go to look at things like or get help around things like restrictions. Another thing that occurs to me is that there are spaces in Green Junction that I don't even know exist until I'm sitting with you. And I don't know if this is just an oversight on my part, but when I go into the dashboard of Green Junction, there's a list of places, but I think that they're only the ones that I have access to. If there's spaces that exist that for some reason I've been overlooked, or spaces that I might be interested in accessing and I would make a request to be added, I don't think they show up on the dashboard. Is that correct?
No, that's absolutely correct. And to be honest, that's by design. I mean, the idea behind Green Junction is that only, just to make things as clear as possible, right now, Bruce and myself are considered the site administrators. We make sure that if there's anything technically wrong with the site, that we have access to it, that we have the ability to change it, that we kind of make kind of the global changes to it. However, each one of these different spaces that we screen, so I'm just going to go down a little bit here, they have their own space administrator. Sometimes there is an individual who has more than one spaces, but generally there's just one person or a set of people who are the space administrators. If I was to go into one of them, it actually lists that space administrator on the top of the screen. And they are responsible and they are in charge in terms of telling me who gets access to that space and who doesn't. When it comes to, actually, I guess the most recent example I've had happen to me was with the rain section. Now, obviously, that's Sharon is the person who runs the rain garden we see on the screen, and she's had some people recently who want access to the resources that she had there, and then she contacts me, and I individually give them permission to do that. Frankly, she does have the ability to do that herself, but generally, people have found it a lot easier just to ask me to do it, and it is a very simple process, especially because oftentimes it requires making a new account for Green Junction, which only a site administrator, someone like me or Bruce, can actually do. So yeah, what you're seeing is actually normal. You only have access from the front page to the spaces that you've been added to. And if you wanted to ask permission to have more of those available on your screen, it actually, while I could do it, I can't really do it because I actually have to get permission from a space administrator first. Not technically, but morally. Yes, question.
Well, I think if we're talking about reasons why people don't use Green Junction, then that's huge, because people can't ask for something that they don't even know exists. And the other thing that strikes me is that when people come on board as new employees, we don't have any, or associates or whatever, we don't have any procedure. Like Catherine Glovich, for example, who's working now with Toronto School Travel Plan, Catherine probably isn't added to any of these, unless maybe Sandra's, because Sandra would have considered it. But I think that there's real issues around the process of accessibility, I guess.
I mean, I can see what you're saying. It's a little bit difficult because the fact is there might be sections, and then really even what we're looking at now, that we don't want anyone to even know exist necessarily. I guess there's really no harm in having people be aware that there's something called, say, the staff room, or that there's one section for the Green Communities Foundation or something along those lines. But even if they were to see it, if they were to click on it, they would see nothing because everything in it has been restricted to the people who have been added to it. However, what your second point especially, is huge. There has to be some sort of process where people are made aware and are added to the added to the spaces that they're supposed to have access to, and that's particularly hard on someone like me, who, when someone comes on board, I might not even be made aware of it, because why would I? I mean, it isn't necessarily any of my business. And even if I was made aware of it, I wouldn't necessarily be made aware of what kind of different projects and programs that they would be reaching out to, that they would have direct contact with. So yeah, no, I think that process is going to be absolutely crucial. That said, and Bruce mentions here that that part of what we're suggesting is that it'll become more relevant to people managing and more engaging for each audience. Well, I think part of our limitation in the past is that since every space administrator was responsible for their own space, and because they were all engaged in different levels, that as a whole, it was harder to get people on board. Because if you had someone who wasn't as engaged, then anyone who was sort of under them, I'm using that sort of in a general sense, but anyone that they would be responsible for adding to it, then you're not really grandfathering those people in. There isn't really a direct connection there. So I do think that it would be useful to have sort of more of a hands-on approach and a more open approach to a lot of the spaces that are here. But at the end of the day, the space administrators are the ones who have to make that decision. I can't. Yeah, and Sandra says that within... sorry?
No, I was just going to say that I would just reiterate that I think a list of all the spaces should be available so that any Green Junction user can go in, see the list. If you click on something and it says restricted access or you don't have access, then the person can make a request, or there's a system in place so that people know. For example, something like the safe. The whole idea with that is that people can access like their own current contract, or they can access the contracts for the grants that they're managing. But I don't even know who administers the safe. So I don't want to. I
almost hate to say it, Shay, but I think you administer the safe.
Well, then I definitely need more training, but and I don't want to belabor the point, but I think if one of our goals is to make Green Junction used more, then I think that's an important piece of it.
I think that's actually, your point is very well made, and I think that the idea of at least opening up these front pages so everyone can see all the spaces that exist, and if they click on it, hey, the information is not going to be there. That's all restricted, but the email address, or at least a way to contact the person who is in charge of that space, is made immediately available. So that person could then, look, it's not like there's going to be a dozen different people who are going to be, a day sending emails to these space administrators. The fact is, you still need to be someone who has an account on Green Junction even to get to this point. So, yeah, I think that's a really good idea because there's really no harm to it. But it is something that we kind of would need to get space administrators as a whole on board with. And I think this your point there, I think, makes it as clear as anything else. I do think it would be a good idea for us to start getting space administrators more involved in sort of a cumulative capacity, meaning that we'll get them all on board with a WIMBA session. I mean, it's tough enough getting people even for this sort of WIMBA session, and I think that's a representative of how disengaged a lot of people are. So kind of reaching out, hey, maybe there needs to be a switch up on some of the people who are administrating some of these spaces. But if there's going to be that, then this is when we need to know it. We need to know it before we go forward because it's not, none of us have time to spend hours a day on making sure that people are visiting and that people are engaging, especially after the first couple of months of the year. Yeah, Bruce, yeah, that's a really good point as well. I mean, the idea is that it's sort of it's a trickle down aspect, which is that, well, actually, it's more like a trickle up in that the 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 use of it will be easier because sort of the structure of it makes more sense. However, it still has we still have to provide the guidance and sort of the hand holding. I only use that term because it's one that we commonly use, but it really just the walkthrough aspect of it to people that are sort of on board, the people who are at the top, and with the knowledge that the structure underneath them is a lot stronger and a lot more easy to use. I think that people will adopt it. But this is exactly the reason I wanted to have a session like this, because that's a great point. When you go in and you're thinking, well, some people are seeing something that's totally different than what I'm seeing. Some people have access to something I didn't even know it existed. Well, maybe it's time to be a little bit more transparent in regards to that, and that when people, especially when they log into Green Junction for the first time, they see that it is something that has a lot of content, and if it's something that they feel like they should be having access to, that they know exactly how they would go about that. I think it should be as clear as possible, because we can't just make implication. We can't just hope that someone understands it just because we have an understanding or we know someone that does. So what I'm going to do now, I'm actually just going to end the sharing of the screen, and then I'm going to push out a poll. And some of the points that you've already made, you might want to just summarize within that. I know that there isn't a lot of people in the room, but there is only a couple of questions in this case. So I'm just going to end the sharing. We'll just take a moment in this case. Okay, and hopefully momentarily you will get the poll up on the screen. Just 3 questions. The first one is just about how often you use Green Junction. The second about what about Green Junction do you currently find most frustrating. I think everyone has at least something that they find frustrating about it. And number 3, what future changes would you like to see to Green Junction as a whole? And believe me, feel free to just, even though we don't have sort of godlike powers to change every aspect of Green Junction, any suggestion that you could have would be helpful, because this is just a change that's going on right now. I mean, there are going to be continual updates, and maybe something isn't possible at the moment, but might be possible in the future. But I've already taken up too much of your time. I went a little overboard here, but I do appreciate those of you who attended today. It is something I still think has a lot of potential. I think it has more potential now even than it did before, because I think I can clearly see how it could be used, how it could be incorporated into a lot more visual aspects, a lot more multimedia, a lot more of the social aspect. I think that's something that we had trouble getting people engaged with, where there'd be actual conversations ongoing in sort of a more of a almost like a news group or a forum style, and I think there's a lot we can do with it. But really the first step to that is making sure that we get as many people on board as possible. So thank you for attending today. I'm going to stop the archive. I'm going to make that available to everybody afterwards, and hopefully some will take me up on it. So at your leisure, just finish up the poll. I'll stick around here if there's any more questions.